I'm Emmanuel Acho. Played 4 years in the National Football League. Now I'm a sports broadcaster. But I really, and I've started thinking about the social issues and trying to figure out, like, how can we fix what's going on in America?
Yeah.
Because, like, I'm a black man, you're a white woman. Those two things are like oil and water seemingly right now. So how can we address those issues? And you know what I realized? There's a lack of exposure. That's what it comes down to. It's a lack of exposure. So I'm first generation American. I grew up without any dogs, right? I grew up with no Milos in my life.
Sure.
And so as a kid, I once got attacked by a dog. And so now as a 30-year-old man, I can't decipher when walking through the street the difference between a dog that's a threat and a dog that's just like a friendly pet. And I say that's the same issue in our society, is that white people have grown up without being around black people, Lily. And so white people can't decipher between a black person that's a threat and a black person that used to play in the NFL and actually is extremely well educated. Black people can't decipher between a white girl that's a racist and might call the cops on me in Central Park and a white girl that is actually just a fun, loving, good spirit. And I think it's all because of a lack of exposure and education. So what I've tried to do is take this time to expose my white friends who have been so worrisome of asking questions. Like, some of my friends have been like, so do you prefer to be called black or African American? And, it's like, some of them don't even know, like, how we want to be addressed. And in my video on my Instagram page, which by the grace of God has now gotten like 13 million views across 3 different platforms, it's really spoke to a lot of people, which has been touching. I addressed 4 major questions, which I just wanted to do on your live for people that haven't watched. So the 4 questions I hear asked so often by so many of my white friends, and I'm sure many of y'all who have tuning in, why do black people care more about white on black crime than black on black crime? How come black people can say the N-word, but I can't? How come y'all are rioting? And so I'll start with the riots, Lily, if I can. I put it like this. Black people, we don't want to get to this point. That's not the case. Like, we don't even want the world to have gotten to this point. And it's not just black people that are rioting, it's several. But in the 1960s, like, the peaceful protests, they tried that, and it didn't work. In 2000, like, they tried that, and it didn't work. And so now it's a matter of like, hey, peace hasn't been working. Let's try to change it up. Lily, when you think about grief, and like you, I'm sure, and we all have, anybody watching this, there are 5 stages of grief, and one of which is anger.
Yep.
And anger sometimes doesn't know how to express itself.
Sure.
When my mom lost her older sister, I was a kid and my aunt had passed. I was about 10 years old, and I opened the door and I come outside because I hear my mom wailing, and she's throwing her body into a wall. And I'm like, what's wrong? And my dad tells me that my mom's sister had died. 20 years later, thinking back on that moment, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Why would you injure yourself? Why would you cause yourself harm? But I realized emotions sometimes don't know how to express themselves. And if I'll use one more analogy that I hope so many of your followers can resonate with. I'm biking in Lake Austin the other day because it's COVID. And if you want to stay fit, you better learn how to bike. And so I'm biking in Lake Austin the other day, Lily, and there's like a white girl 15 meters ahead of me. And I'm like, hey, on your left. And she doesn't hear me. And so I get 10 meters away and I'm like, hey, on your left. And she had her headphones in, so she doesn't hear me. And so, Lily, I get 5 meters away and I'm like, on your left. And she still doesn't hear me. And then finally, as I pull up next to her, I'm like, on your left, and we collide. And Lily, I say that's the same thing African Americans have been going through. In the 1960s, Lily, they were like, we're repressed, and nothing happened. They didn't change the course of action. And so 20 years later, black people are like, hey, we're oppressed, and nothing happened. And again, we're oppressed. And finally, in 2020, we've seen the collision of races. And this is the most racial turmoil we've been in. So to your viewers, a lot of them have asked, because they've been in my comments and my emails saying, hey, how do you define white privilege? Like, my life has been hard. How the heck are you going to tell me that I'm privileged? And I say this, Lily, white privilege isn't saying your life hasn't been hard. Sure. It's saying that your skin color hasn't contributed to the difficulty of your life.
For sure.
And I hope a lot of people watching this hear that, because again, if I'm running a race with somebody and I had a and the start official, they hold me back for the first 200 yards or the first 200 seconds. And now they're like, okay, Emmanuel, you're free to go run. That's not a fair race. And while in our life, we all run one figurative lap, right? Like you run a lap, I run a lap, and that lap is equivalent to our lifetime. Several white people got a head start because our ancestors. And it's no problem with that. It's just acknowledging the head start. Think about it like this. When wealth was being acquired in the late 1800s and 1900s, like black people were slaves in the early 1800s. When the banks in the 1950s really started giving out credit to buy houses, black people couldn't get credit. And so I kind of tried to address like, that's really the white privilege conversation.
Yeah.
The other conversation that I've heard so much about is the N-word, right? Like that. And that's a sensitive topic. So for those tuning in, like this one was really hard for me. So the N-word in our day, in modern day, like we don't think anything of it. We hear it in rap songs, we see it in TV shows, it's not a big deal. But when you realize like that word is synonymous with hatred, oppression, and execution, like think about that for a second. But we don't think about that because in our day, we just hear it in hip hop culture. And so I'm like, that word was a governor of Arkansas in 1960s. Like he said, whites and N-words will never go to school as long as I'm alive. So like you and I would never have been able to go to school. And this wasn't a long time ago. Yeah. Like this was just 50, 60 years ago. And so white people took a word that was meant for evil. And like black people turned it into a term of endearment. And so I say that like, that's why white people can't and shouldn't say that word is because like you really got to know the meaning behind it. And then Lili, lastly, kind of expounding on this, like black on black crime versus white on white crime, white on black crime. How come so many people, so many African Americans, they only care about white on black crime? And I just simply submit this. When a black person commits a crime, they get punished. That's what we've seen. When a white person commits a crime against a black person, they get off. Ahmaud Arbery, everybody saw that. Ahmaud Arbery, what most people don't realize, and I'm sure several of your viewers do, some may not, remember this. The murderers, the people that killed him, they were free for 2 months. It's only that we saw the footage, Lili, that now got them arrested. So imagine, Lili, what we haven't seen on camera.
Right.
You know, like it's.
Yes, that said, what did he say? It was like racism has always been here. It's just now being filmed.
And now it's being filmed. And I think about like the Amy Cooper incident in Central Park. Obviously, you saw that one, I'm assuming. Okay, you saw that. And so that was a white woman, for those that are watching, but she had her dog was off a leash in Central Park in New York, and it's illegal to walk your dog off a leash. So a black man, a bird watcher, actually was recording her, telling her, hey, can you leash your dog? And she says, stop recording me or I'm going to call the cops and tell them you're threatening my life. Yep. And he said, call the cops. So she calls the cops and she starts yelling and screaming, there's a black man threatening my life. He was doing no such thing. That story went viral. If y'all haven't seen it, see it. Lili, I was reminded 1955, Emmett Till, the 14-year-old black man who was accused of flirting with a white woman in a store. He was mutilated, beaten, and executed. In 1956, the two white men who killed him, they got off. They admitted that they did it because they knew they couldn't be tried due to double jeopardy. Lili, in 2017, the white woman who accused Emmett Till of flirting with her, she recanted her story. She said it didn't happen.
Right.
Emmett Till would be, I believe, in his early 80s right now. And so, Lili, so many things that we see far-fetched. I'm like, no, these are real issues. And I guess I'm privileged, one, that you would bring me on because you have a following and a fan base that can just learn from a genuine conversation. Like the beautiful part of this is you're a white woman. I'm a black male. Like we're not supposed to get along. We're not supposed to, in theory and on paper, we're not supposed to be able to have real conversation like this. But all it takes is a little bit of education. Yeah. Like even in our, if I can put our business out there, like even in our DMs today, I found out you and I have the same book agent.
Yep.
like what? Like I had no idea. I'm on the phone with my book agency and they're like, hey, Emmanuel, you should consider this, consider that. I was like, hey, I might go on Instagram Live with Lili. They're like, wait, really? We represent her. And so, like, those of y'all who are watching, it's up to us. It's up to the next generation to break down these barriers. It's up to you, it's up to me, and it's up to everybody viewing to realize, you know what? What don't I know?
Sure.
I have to realize that there are so many things I don't know about someone of the opposite sex,
Yeah.
about someone of a different complexion. And I take it upon myself to help educate so many of my white brothers and sisters. Like one of my white friends, she thought the phrase black don't crack was just like an idiom, like it was a figure of speech. I was like,
Mhm.
no, like we have darker skin, therefore we absorb the sun better, therefore in theory we age better. Like
Yeah.
it's not just like a figure of speech, it's a scientific thing. So this is the beautiful part, one, of social media, but two, of world right now, because you as a white woman and me as a black man are actually defying the odds. And I think we're doing what society needs, which is to see conversation.
I think it's an interesting point that you like we're really supposed to get along, but also how um what did you said that my brain's fried. Forgive me.
I get it.
What was I gonna say? Okay, keep talking. It'll come back.
The real, the
Oh,
real,
what I was gonna say
please.
is that I think there's a lot of people who aren't willing to ask the questions.
Yes,
I think it's
yes.
along with that. Again, it's like there's so many posts going around right now, but the one that says like if it's a conversation that you're afraid to have, it's a conversation you're supposed to have, and it's a matter of just starting that conversation and asking that uncomfortable question, and even if the
Mm-hmm.
comfortable, at least you're learning. And obviously, as a white woman, I know that I will never understand what it's like to be racially profiled the way that a black person would. And, I'm just trying to educate myself as well as educate the people watching.
Yeah.
I don't know what, I can't say that I have an all white fan base. I don't really know what my fan base is. Like, I don't really pay attention to it.
Well, you muted the comments, so like we.
Well, people told me that I should because one, when people can rewatch this, it's very distracting to have comments.
Ah, smart.
Yeah, and also people tend to bring up things that aren't relevant or important, and it hates me when people start that just irrelevant shit. Trying to talk about something really important, it's like stop trying to ask. So it's totally, it has nothing to do with you or anything. It's just a matter of people are annoying sometimes. Fact.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think like for those who are watching, everybody's like, well, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? And I'm gonna give y'all the secret. Action doesn't have to be active.
Okay.
It's simple. Action can be passive. What do you mean by that? We're simply having a conversation where you're speaking and I'm listening, and I'm speaking and you're listening. And that passive action is actually what will make all the difference in our world. Like to just simply be able to say, I don't understand. Can you help me understand?
Sure.
And I understand like some of the conversations are uncomfortable. Like even I walked over to two of my white friends' house yesterday or a couple days ago, and their 3-year-old son, he wouldn't give me a hug, and I've known him since the day he was born. And the dad came up to me a couple hours later and was like, "Hey, I didn't know if he didn't hug you because he hadn't seen a black guy in a while." The wife was mortified. She
Yeah.
was like, "Why would you say that to him?" And I was like, "Man, you know what? I appreciate you saying that
Yeah.
because that means you're aware."
Yeah.
And the wife didn't want to bring it up, my dearest friend, because like she was worried. But I was like, no, this is how conversations have to start.
Mm.
Like, hey, I didn't know if my son didn't hug you because he hadn't seen a black man. Because now I'm challenging him. We'll change that, bro.
Sure.
Because if at 3 years old, your son doesn't know how to act around somebody that has darker skin, your white son, imagine what will happen at 13 years old. And imagine what will happen at 30 years old. And Lily, it's all cyclical. Like people think there's some grand fix. I got to storm Washington, D.C. I have to change legislation. And that's really not the case. You just have to change like your house. The beautiful thing is I got an email from a 19-year-old girl who lived in Utah. And she was like, my dad's never had these racial conversations with me. because like he doesn't acknowledge it. And I've now realized how privileged I am. And I'm like, thank you.
Yeah.
Because you will change the next generation. Like it's, oh, Lily, I'll give you this analogy. You know when, and y'all know this when you're watching it, when you run the bath, like when you run the bath water, you hit a water fountain that hasn't been run for a while. At first, the water comes out and it's dirty. It's just kind of like brown and stuff. And then it starts to get a little bit clearer. And then after running the water for about 10 seconds, it's completely clear. That's what's going to happen in our life. Right now, our society, it's dirty. You know, like it's dirty with racial inequality, with racial stereotypes. But if your viewers, if my fan base, if you and I find a way to continue to change the next generation, the water is going to get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And if those of y'all who are watching, and if we don't want to see these kinds of riots happen again, let's fix the cause. It's like, Lily, if you get sick because you're eating a certain type of food, you're allergic to Mexican food. Sure, you can like keep taking medicine after every time you eat it,
Sure.
Or you can just fix the problem.
Right. You could just stop.
Right? Or you can just stop eating Mexican food. And now, mind you, Mexican food is bomb, and I live in Texas, so I ain't telling nobody to stop eating Mexican food, okay? Them enchiladas go crazy. But I will say this, like, we're trying to put a Band-Aid on things. We have to get stronger legislation. We have to make, like, these laws a lot more stringent. No, just fix the problem. Yeah. Just learn how to understand one another. Like, just be able to have a conversation like you and I are having right now.